Hello, this is Ben, and today we're looking at a Task 1 bar chart. Let's take a look together. The chart below shows the range of activities performed online by individuals in the United Kingdom in 2018. Then just usual general instructions. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So let's take a look at the actual bar chart and what it shows. So it's in the past for a specific year, activities performed online. I personally wouldn't say the range, I would say our range, because it is 9 specific activities, but of course people can do other things on the internet too. It's percentages, but it's not something like a pie chart where they add up to 100%, because one British person can do several activities. He or she might play or download games and listen to music. So it's just talking about the percentage of British people who did each activity, at least according to the survey. The people who answer a survey are called respondents or participants. They are people who respond to the survey. So they don't ask every single person, they ask a sample, like maybe 1,000, 2,000 people, maybe a smaller sample, maybe a bigger one. And it gives us a general idea of how much people did these activities. Just, I guess, asking people of all different ages in the UK. So let's take a look at the essay I received for this one. As always, I recommend that you pause the video on each of the slides and read it yourself. Think about what you would change and think about what scores you think it might get. I'll give you a chance to pause now. So this is the first slide. This is the second. And finally, this is the third and last. And to think about the scores, it's best to look at this. It's the Writing Task 1 band descriptors. 4 IELTS available online for free. It's the public version that anyone can access. And if you're looking on your phone, it might be a bit small. So, of course, you can find another way to look at it on a separate device, or you can print it out and take a look. I always recommend thinking about the score you would give it so that you can think a little bit about how you can get a good score yourself. So let's look at the student's essay. The given bar chart represents the types of activities that the British people performed online in 2018. The British people sounds a bit odd. We can just say British people. Represents the types of activities. That could be a bit better. It's showing percentage, which is a kind of proportion. Let's say that. Oops, sorry, that's a bit messy. The respective proportions of British people who performs various online activities. I could just say various, but I'm going to be specific and say 9. Well, no, I'll change it. I'll go back to various. The reason I thought about changing it was because in the next part, the person talks about the one done the most and the one done the least. My problem with this mainly is it says overall, and it's not really an overall statement, is it? If we just talk about the largest one and we just talk about the smallest one, they are key details, yep. But it's not an overall trend. Overall trend is talking about all the information in a very general way, which is very hard to do here, actually, to be honest. What we sometimes do is we try to group the data. So if half of them were for entertainment purposes, for example, and half of them were for business purposes, then we could divide them that way. Or if it were for entertainments and educational purposes. But it doesn't really work like that, because you can watch online video content for entertainment or for information, and it might possibly be related to your job too. So because there is not an easy way to group the data in this way, you could possibly think about the range. Range is the difference between the smallest and the largest. You could say the proportion of people who did the activities ranged between 25% and 85%. But again, I don't think that's a good idea, because if you're talking about the range, it seems like you have to first mention what the activities are, and that would take a really long time and require a lot of words, because we're given a lot of different categories here. So I actually think that the writer does a really good thing here by keeping it very general, not trying to name them all. It would be horrible if they were all named, and it would be a waste of time, because the reader can see what they are. Doesn't need the writer to repeat them all. Nevertheless, the use of overall is not right there. So let's just change it to something more general. It is clear that the most people isn't quite right. The highest percentage of people. Or we can keep the most, possibly, if we want to change the words, but we can't say the least. The least is for uncountable nouns. The fewest British people, who was used incorrectly there, the fewest British people sold goods and services online during the given year. So we use the fewest because it's a countable plural. The reason it's okay is because if you think about it, the number of people residing in Great Britain that year is a fixed number. I don't know what that number would be in millions, but let's just give a random number. Let's say like 200 million or something. So it means that the highest percentage is also the highest number. If the number, for example, is 25%, we're talking about a quarter of all British people, then quite clearly that would be 50 million people we're talking about, which is a quarter of the total. So it is actually okay here, and it's quite nice, I think, to do that, so that you're not repeating yourself and you're not saying percentage all the time, just because that's the unit of measurement given. So I'll leave that. The most people, so the highest number of people basically is the highest percentage in this case. The most people in the UK sent or received emails online, while the fewest British people. So I mean, really, it's kind of a knowledge thing. The UK is not the same as Great Britain. On my UK passport, it says the United Kingdom. Of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Which should make clear that the UK is more than Great Britain. It's Great Britain and Northern Ireland together, so people in Britain sent or received, the most people in Britain sent or received emails online, while the fewest British people sold goods and services online during the given year. We've got online twice, so maybe just find a way to avoid repetition there. We don't have to say British people here because we've already said what we're talking about, people in Britain, so we can just say the fewest here and skip the thing we're talking about, British people. So if we read it again, overall it's clear that the most people in Britain sent or received emails, while the fewest sold goods and services online during the given year. There's no way to send or receive emails without using the internet, so it's a bit unnecessary to say online there. Goods and services can be sold kind of face-to-face in a shop, for example, with an in-store purchase, so I'll keep the second one there. Don't really need to say during the given year. It doesn't really add anything, so I'll skip it because the word's already been used here. We don't need to keep repeating words. In detail, not really used correctly here. In detail is more like I'm going to describe this in detail. So let's say something like examining the charts in more detail or in closer detail. It can be seen that the figure for sending or receiving emails showed the highest. Why is showed being used there? Was the highest. The figure was the highest. Was the smallest, was the highest among the activities performed online. Among the activities performed online isn't really necessary. It's very clear that we're talking about that. Which was is used incorrectly there. We're talking about what the figure stands at, so we use at just under 85%. When we use which, it usually refers back to the previous things, which should be the activities performed online. And we're not actually referring back to that, we're referring to the figure for sending or receiving emails. So which would be different. I'll just give you a quick example. I don't want to delay this too much. Let me change that. Was the highest? Was the largest? Was the greatest? It was 85%. It would be boring to have a really short sentence like this, so I can actually, and of course not at. I was still thinking about the at we were talking about before. My apologies. We can just embed it, we say here, with 2 commas. You don't always embed it, but in this particular case you would. Which was 85%. Was the largest, was the highest. So here, which is used as a relative pronoun replacing the word it. Talking about this figure. And which just refers back to the previous thing. That's much more normal. So the writer's trying to use a long complex sentence because I say you should. It's required for, the highest grammar scores, but it's not done correctly, unfortunately. So moving on, the second highest. So the second highest means the second highest figure, and it's absolutely fine to skip it there because it's referring back to the previous sentence. But it's figure 4. And we can't skip that part, the figure 4, like the figure representing. So the second highest figure was for researching goods and services at around 77%. Yep, that's fine. Followed by online banking, social networking, and watching online video content, which were between 60 and 70%. So this is really a really good effort. It's hard when you have so much data, isn't it, to talk about it all. But the person is just giving a quick range, between 60 and 70%. And that's a really good way of dealing with it. Got to change a few things. So I would say followed by those for online banking. So we're still talking about figure. And if it's one other figure, we can say that. If it's more than one, we can say those figures for. And here, 1, 2, 3. We got to say those. So the second highest figure was for researching goods and services, followed by, so the next highest, followed by online banking, social networking, and watching online videos. If that's the order, like third highest, fourth highest, fifth highest, you would say respectively, to make it better, followed respectively. I'm not going to check that that's the right order to save time, but I assume it is. Rather saying which were between, slightly better might be which ranged between. So online banking, social networking, online videos. Yep, great. Yeah, they all fall within that range. So this is a good way to cover a lot of information in a short time. Just say they kind of fall within that range. You wouldn't really have to do it here. You could talk about these ones together. You could possibly talk about these ones together. So moving on, so turning to listening to music. Okay, that's slightly awkward, but I'll leave it. The figure was under 60%. Okay, this word's showing the writer clearly doesn't understand it. Here we can actually use which. We don't need to. It's in black. As kind of optional, I'll put it in brackets. The figure was under 60%, a similar proportion. but it sounds a bit informal if you just use it as, so better to add this. The figure was under 60%, which was, so that figure, which was a similar proportion. Well, we usually say similar to, don't we? Similar to that, so that figure, similar to that for watching streamed or catch-up TV. Just over 30% was indicated. Okay, so because it's a survey, the writer, I think, wants to say that 30% of surveyed British people indicated that they played or downloaded games this year in 2018. But that would be messy changing that. So I'm just going to say reported. You could argue that Brits is a bit informal. We say Brits for British people, but I don't want to keep repeating the same words. So of Brits, reported, 30% of them reported playing or downloading games. So basically said they did these things. And that's easier to change because of the grammar, reported, ing in this case. Which was the second lowest. So, okay, that's not bad. So 30% was the second lowest. But we don't really have a reference word there. So I think proportion is too far back. So I'm going to add the noun percentage was the second lowest percentage among the activities. The percentage of selling goods, really percentage for. Percentage of is like the percentage of British people who sold goods. Percentage for, just kind of a very short style, shorthand. Percentage given for, the percentage provided for, in the data. The percentage for selling goods and services accounted for approximately 25%. Again, accounted for, it's not really the right language, is it? There's some language misused here. Just was is fine, or stood at is fine if you're giving a specific figure. Slightly more formal. I kind of just think, though, it might be a bit nicer to say something like approximately 1/4 of British people, or approximately 1 in 4 British people. Because if you're just giving specific figures all the time, it's very repetitive, isn't it? 25% is obviously exactly a quarter. So we can say 1/4 or 1 in 4. And that would just make it less repetitive with the style. The percentage for selling goods and services stood at approximately 25%, which was lower than a third the figure for sending or receiving emails. Well, less than a third of blah blah, less than a third of the figure for sending or receiving emails. Less is better than lower there. Less than a quarter, more than a quarter. We usually use these words for talking about those kinds of percentages. Well, fractions really, third quarter. Let's just read over that very quickly. The given bar chart represents the respective proportions of British people who performed various online activities in 2018. So respective just means for percentages for each kind individually, rather than giving one figure for people who did 3 different activities, for example. Like 10% of British people played games, did online banking, and sent and received emails. 10% did all 3. Respective just indicates that it's separate figures for each one. just a small thing. The given bar chart represents the respective proportions of British people who perform various online activities in 2018. It's clear that the most people in Britain sent or received emails, while the fewest sold goods and services online during the given year. Examining the chart in closer detail, it can be seen that the figure for sending or receiving emails was the highest at just under 85%. The second highest was for researching goods and services, around 77%, followed respectively by those for online banking, social networking, and watching online video content, which is those figures which ranged between 60 and 70%. Turning to listening to music, the figure was under 60%, which was a similar proportion to that for watching streamed or catch-up TV. Just over 30% of Brits reported playing or download games, which was the second lowest percentage among the activities. The percentage for selling goods and services stood at approximately 25%, which was less than a third of the figure for sending or receiving emails. That would be much better. What did I give this? 6 overall. 6 in each, 6 for each category. Task achievement, why 6? Presents an overview with information appropriately selected. I actually think it didn't really do that too well, because it talks about overall here and then just talks about the highest and the lowest figures, which is really lazy. It's not really giving an overall trend. But I'm not being too strict about that here. I'm still going to give it a 6. And the reason I'm going to not be strict about it is that I can't think of any way to talk about everything in a way that has much value. So what I would do is I would say something like, it's clear that overall people in Great Britain performs a wide range of activities online. During that year. And this would be better because you have to be very general. As we discussed, you can't easily group the data and you can't really give a range without mentioning what they all are, which would take a long time. But because mine is so general, it doesn't really have much value. Just saying they did a diverse range of things online. But we're not really asked to give a general trend. Select and report the main features and make comparisons. And talking about the highest and lowest, that's definitely key features. Making comparisons, not done very well. It's clear that significantly fewer British people did 2 specific activities. Playing and downloading games and selling goods and services, that's not done. These are all much higher. And obviously, if I were making comparisons, I would talk about probably these together, and these 2 final ones being significantly lower than all the others. That's not really done, is it? So that's going to affect the scoring. But I looked at 5 and I thought 5 would be a bit too harsh. Recounts details mechanically with no clear overview. There may be no data to support the description. I thought generally it wasn't detail recorded mechanically. There was a little bit of variety, but there were definitely missed opportunities. like talking about a quarter of British people here, instead of just giving the specific figure again. So you could argue that it was a little bit mechanical. What I kind of decided in the end was for task achievements, I would give it kind of 6 minus if I could, but I can't. I just felt that 5 was a little bit too harsh. So cohesion and coherence, I gave this 6 also. Arranges information and ideas coherently and is clear overall progression. I thought so, yeah, kind of talking about the highest and lowest first, and then just kind of moving on, talking about the ones that were done most prevalently to the ones that were done least prevalently. As I said, I don't think comparisons were made because we're jumping from 60 to 30 and 25, but there's no real recognition of the fact that there's a significant difference here. These two are significantly lower than all the ones we've talked about before. As for cohesion within and or between sentences, it can be a bit faulty at times. The way which was is used incorrectly here. But there's also a lot of good stuff. It's used correctly in other parts. For vocabulary, I felt that it was trying to use less common vocabulary. Attempts were made, but there was just too much inaccuracy for it to be higher than 6. And again, we've talked about accounted for not being used correctly. The word show not being used correctly. The word indicate having the potential to be used correctly, but not, in this case, being used accurately. Finally, grammar. 6, again, uses a mix of simple and complex sentence forms, but not a 7 because I didn't think there were either frequent error-free sentences or a large enough variety of complex structures. So, for example, which is sometimes used well, but, it might be a bit overused and actually not always used correctly. Used correctly most of the time. But it's about having not only accurate sentences, but also showing range with what you can do. Therefore, these were my scores. I wonder how closely your predictions matched. As always, thank you for watching and listening. Goodbye.